Hi, my name's Andy Tidy and welcome back to another episode of Canal Hunter Series 6, where we are exploring the lost canals associated with the Dudley and Stourbridge canals, here on the western side of Netherton Hill. In the last few episodes, we've strayed outside the historic limits of the BCN, as defined either by their original construction or by later acquisition. Well, today we have turned the corner and we're picking up the trail of the Dudley Canals number 1 and 2, which will together lead us right back over the watershed to the Worcester-Birmingham Canal at Selly Oak. Identifying the exact location of end-on junctions when two canals meet can be a little bit challenging at best. But essentially the junction is at the bottom of the Delph Locks behind me, or to give them their full name, Black Delph, on account of the quantity of coal, fire clay and ironstone which were packed into this zone. Now the old boaters knew this flight as 9 locks, and I'm sure I can't have been the only boater to count his way up the flight and be left somewhat puzzled when I reached the top lock on the count of 8. This bewilderment is rather encouraged by the presence of 9 Locks Bridge at the very top. The truth is that the attractive flight that we see today, with the waterfalls cascading down the northern sides, is a Mark II version of this flight. The top and the bottom lock chambers are sited where the originals were built in 1779, but the ever-present mining substance played havoc with their levels, and in 1858 they were rebuilt, this time on a straight line, and as a result they were slightly deeper and the number was reduced from 9 to today's 8. The original flight climbed up the hill just to the right of today's line, more or less following the road called the Goss. These old locks had large side pans which extended right the way across the line that we see today. And a good indicator of the presence of the old flight is the BCN cottages number 151 and 152, which still stand alongside the old route. The subsidence didn't finish with the building of the new locks. If you look at the steps on the off side, that's the side away from the towpath, at the tail end of the locks, there were steps that went down from the level I'm standing on down to the water. Well, if you go down to the bottom few locks, there is a full complement of steps rising up from the water to the lock. But if you get to lock 4 from the top, you'll find it's just got a few steps. Lock 3 has just got 1 step, and then lock 2, which I'm standing on now, has got no steps at all. So clearly we can see that these new locks have also been raised up to overcome further settlement into the adjacent Wallows Colliery, which was sited in some waste ground just over that side. Well, I feel I have really got back into the groove of Canal Hunter now. When I got up and I got into the car, the ice had to be chipped off the windscreen and it's freezing cold. And of course that means that the leaves are coming off, which helps canal hunting no end. And I feel I've been very fortunate in my timing of coming here to the Black Delph Locks, because they are best viewed when they've got water cascading down the bywashes. And as we've had quite a lot of rain recently, the canal levels are pretty high. But before we leave the new locks here at Delph, let's go and have a look and see what we can find of the old ones. So just below the top lock, which as I said is in its original position but not necessarily the original chamber, the main flight of locks steams off down the hill straight ahead. But bearing off slightly to the left, there is a lovely old Horsley Ironworks roving bridge, and the canal departs into a basin along here. Latterly, the basin was used as a loading bay for the colliery. But back in the day, before the new flight of locks was built, this was the entrance to the old Delph 9. Well, that kind of looks like the entrance to a lock. So if we come around the path to the side, we should be in luck to find a bit of the old chamber. Now, I would love to say that this is undoubtedly the lock gate and the lock chamber that was here and has been nestling in the woods for the last 150 years. But wood in a damp, wet climate doesn't last that long, so no doubt they were an addition when they prettified up the place. And no doubt these edging stones, which are modern concrete ones, are not original. But look a little bit closer down and the water seems to have got a bit of a slope to it. Of course, what we can actually see here is these are the original sides of the lock, and this section has been built up to prettify it. But it is the genuine old lock chamber, but it's all sunk down with substance at that end. It's dropped by about 4 feet. Another victim of the local colliery. Actually, this semi-restoration project was undertaken back in the 1970s, but it is still a bit of a hidden gem tucked here along the back of the Delph Locks. Now, just upstream of the Delph Locks, if you just walk a few hundred yards along the towpath, you'll come out on the site of what was the mighty Round Oaks Iron and Steel Works. This was a massive enterprise through until the 1970s, but then, like most of British construction industry, it came to an abrupt end. The site now is much better known by its local name of the Merry Hill Shopping Centre. And as you pass through this way, it's possible to believe that the canal that we see today is largely unchanged since the day it was built. But of course, like most things in life, it's been undergoing a slow evolutionary process of change. In fact, I don't believe that there is anything much left of the Dudley No. 1 canal in its original format, apart from its course along most of its line. Nearly everything has been reworked and rebuilt over the intervening centuries. These days, this end of the Merry Hill Waterfront is a pretty cool and calm, quiet place. But back in the days of the Industrial Revolution, it was anything but. Where I'm walking through now was the epicentre of the Round Oaks Iron Works. It spanned both sides of the canal, and it was laid over and around the collieries which supplied it with the coal it needed. And as today's Dudley Canal winds its way out of the modern waterfront development and out of the old Round Oaks Steelworks site, it continues to thread its way through the rest of the local iron industry. There was the Merry Hill Ironworks immediately over there to my left, and then as we walk along towards Pear Tree Lane, we'll be coming along to the huge Woodside Ironworks. These were all the ironworks that we had a look at, or the foundations we had a look at when we travelled along the Pensnett branch a few weeks ago. The Pensnett branch runs almost parallel to the canal here, just about 3 locks higher up. These days it's mostly a few distant drones of ventilation units, but mostly what I hear are the ducks quacking and the birds singing in the trees. Wind the clock back 150 years and it was all so very, very different. Do you know, it's roving bridges like the one behind me that I think have been my downfall. I see these bridges and I think, well, what used to lie behind them? Now, the answer in nearly every case is just the entrance to an old canal basin. But this distinctive style of cast iron roving bridge built nearby in Tipton is normally indicative of something a little bit more. Well, this one is a little bit different, and it is the gateway to another distinct lost section of the BCN, known locally as the 2 Locks line, on account of the fact it had 2 locks along its course. This was a shortcut canal built to connect the Dudley No. 1 canal into the Dudley No. 2 canal, and it saved a mile or more as the canal wound its way up to Blowers Green and then around the other side of the Blackbrook Valley. But the downfall of the embankment was its location. It was again built on top of that thick 30-foot seam of coal, and that coal proved to be irresistible to the local colliery owners. So they dug it out and the canal and its embankment collapsed again and again and again. The first big collapse was in 1894, and after repeated attempts they finally gave up on the line in 1909, and canal traffic was forced to go back to the old route up to Blowers Green and around the far side. And so all we have left today are 2 roving bridges, giving this hint to what used to lay out there in the valley between. Well, that brings us pretty much to the end of this episode of Canal Hunter. We've come up the Dudley No. 1 canal and we've hopped across to the Dudley No. 2. And it's this canal that will pretty much see us out as we complete our exploration of the missing 60 miles of the BCN. What turned out to be a bit of a side interest has become a 4-year project, but we are getting very near to the end. From here the canal will go relentlessly to the southeast until ultimately it joins the Worcester-Birmingham Canal in Selly Oak. One huge massive diversion to keep the trade away from the BCN and its heavy tolls, which would be levied if they went via Tipton through to Birmingham. Now, the one constant factor which has been coming over time and time again throughout all of the series of Canal Hunter has been coal. Its location, its extraction, its transport and its use. And by a strange twist of fate, I am making this video on the very day that the closing remarks are being made of the Climate Change Conference in Glasgow, an event which I think in history will be seen as marking the end of widespread use of coal for power generation across the world. Now, all this talk about coal got me thinking, and I'm a bit puzzled why I never thought about it before. Not about how coal is made, because I know it's caused by large amounts of biomass which were crushed together and put under massive heat and massive pressure for a massive amount of time. I learnt all that in school. But what never really struck me was why coal isn't being made anymore. Why is it a fossil fuel only? Well, of course, the answer was right there at my fingertips if I only asked Google. So that's what I did. Now, excuse me if you paid more attention to your school lessons than I did. But in order to make coal, coal was created about 360 million years ago. That was before even the dinosaurs roamed the earth. And in order to make coal, you need huge quantities of non-decomposed plant matter, pressure and time, and a lot of all of them. Back at the time, all the continents of the earth were crushed together in one single supercontinent. We call it Pangaea, but as there was no one there, who's to say what it was called? It was somewhere around where South America is today. And it was a kind of semi-tropical area with lots of shallow lagoons. And it's believed that it just kind of rained all the time in the shadow of some central mountains. And this caused the trees, which had just evolved, to grow and grow. And the key thing that caused this to trigger was a substance called lignites. It was a kind of building molecule in plants which, instead of creating soft structures, created hard woody structures like the barks of trees. Now, the thing is, these trees were mega fertile and they pretty much took over the place. And as we know, trees give off oxygen, and they pushed the oxygen content of the world to about twice the current levels. Curious thing is, of course, today trees break down with bacteria and fungi and it all returns to the earth in just a few years. But back then, the bacteria and the fungi hadn't worked out how to digest these weird lignites. And so the trees just fell where they stood, and new ones grew, and fell and grew and fell and grew. In fact, it took 60 million years for the bugs to catch up, by which time there was a fair pile of trees. And because these trees fell in shallow lagoons, they got covered up by silt, which in turn formed clay, and that was impermeable to the bugs later on, so they couldn't get at it. And then the whole lot got ground down deep under the ground as the continent changed and shifted. And that applied the heat, and that applied the pressure. And for every 10 feet of biomass, it turned into 1 foot of coal. Well, then this supercontinent Pangaea, it all broke up, and all the fragments went all over the world and became the continents that we know today. And that is why you find coal all over the world, because all the world used to be in one place. Well, anyhow, that is the end of the use of coal as a production of energy worldwide from here on, we hope. It's certainly the end of coal in this area because it was all dug out. And it is most certainly the end of this episode of Canal Hunter. Next time, I'll join you on the Dudley No. 2 Canal as we continue to explore the lost sections of the BCN all the way through to its conclusion on the Worcester-Birmingham Canal in Selly Oak. But till then, cheerio and happy hunting.